Hello Internet, my name is Father Casey Cole. I'm a Franciscan friar and Catholic priest, and today I'll be answering your questions about sexual ethics. Can't wait to see the comments on this one. Why is same-sex activity immoral? This is actually a great one to start with, not just because it's the most relevant and most controversial today, but because it helps shed light on the entire Catholic framework for sex. For us, all things have a purpose for being created and an end to fulfill. For sexual activity, there are two such purposes: to bring life into the world and to bring a couple deeper into a covenantal union of love. The reason that same-sex activity is not permissible is the same reason that masturbation, pornography, sex before marriage, artificial contraception, threesomes, and a host of other things are not permissible. It fails to meet one of the two ends. For a sexual act to be moral, it must be at least open to procreation and loving in nature. When it comes to nudity or sexual content, where's the line between art and pornography? It may surprise some to realize that many old churches and even Catholic museums contain works of art depicting nudity, and that the church has no problem with this. In reality, the church loves the beauty of the human body and the wonder of sex. These things should be lauded and lifted up. The problem comes when these things are cheapened, exploited, or exaggerated for the sake of arousing the viewer. At this point, it ceases to be about glorifying the subject and becomes all about gratifying the viewer. In general, I recommend asking three questions. What is the purpose of the work? What is the amount of discretion used? And what effect does the work have on the subjects themselves? This last one is rarely considered. I'm a Catholic and also asexual. What, if anything, does our faith teach on this with regards to marriage or sexual activity? As far as I've read, and I could be wrong on this, there isn't much at all specifically about asexuality from the Catholic Church. I'm not sure if this is because the Church doesn't recognize it as a legitimate state of being or because it's still fairly a new concept, but there just isn't much there. What I will say, though, is that sex is an essential part of marriage, and so if someone feels no sexual desire towards their partner, it can't really fulfill what a marriage is intended for. You can be partners and friends and support one another, but it's just not a marriage. Luckily, the Church does not require marriage, and in fact, both Jesus and St. Paul hold celibacy as a greater choice for those with this gift. Maybe it's just a gift that you have. I'm infertile due to a congenital condition that cannot be treated or cured. Would it still be okay for me to take a husband and consummate marriage with him, even with this knowledge? Yes. According to paragraph 3 of Canon 1084 of the Code of Canon Law, sterility neither prohibits nor nullifies marriage. That said, Canon 1098 makes clear that those who willfully hide this from their spouse contract an invalid marriage. As long as you're open and honest, it's fine. Is divorce always wrong? Even if your spouse cheats, even if your spouse is emotionally, verbally, financially, sexually, or physically abusive? Divorce is never a good thing, but it is sometimes the advisable thing. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says as much in paragraphs 2382 to 2386. In short, divorce is always immoral because it breaks up the family, traumatizes kids, and sets a bad example for society. But sometimes one party can be free of guilt because they did everything within their power to be faithful. In certain cases, the Catechism even says that it's permissible. Is artificial birth control always sinful? No, but in the way that you probably mean it, yes. As birth control per se, as a means to prevent conception, yes, it is almost always sinful because it presents an artificial means of separating the couple and diminishing the ends of the sexual act. There may be practical reasons for this, but no moral ones. The reason I say no is because birth control can sometimes be taken for its secondary effects, such as treating acne, and certain drugs may have a secondary effect themselves of diminishing fertility. This is an example of the law of double effect, cases in which you will something good, but a second unintended negative consequence occurs. In these cases, it's permissible. If the intention is not to prevent pregnancy, it just happens as a result of some other treatment, this is allowed. What's the difference between using artificial contraception, like condoms, and natural family planning? There is a misconception among Catholics sometimes that planning childbirth is immoral. There's nothing wrong with being prudent and planning out a family. The issue comes in how you do it. Having sex but removing a key component of the sexual act, the openness to life, is problematic. Choosing to abstain from sex for certain periods of time as to not get pregnant is just virtuous and responsible. Is flirting outside of marriage considered adultery? Well, it really depends on what you mean by flirting and what you mean by outside of marriage. Let's start with the latter. If by outside of marriage you mean extramarital, as in you are already married, I would say that just about anything that conveys attraction is something to be avoided. Don't be giving signs or playing games. That is not good for you or your spouse. On the other hand, if by outside of marriage you mean premarital, as in before being married while both parties are single, there's a lot more freedom here. You want to make sure not to slip into lustful words or actions, but sharing an attraction with another, being charming, offering compliments, and gauging interest is just a part of the dating process. It's perfectly fine. Is masturbation always a mortal sin? No, but that's only because nothing is always a mortal sin. As I've talked about in other videos, in order for something to be a mortal sin, it must deal with grave matter, be done with full knowledge of the consequences of the action, and complete freedom of will. In the case of masturbation, many people act out of compulsion as a result of abuse due to addiction or even after significant spiritual warfare. While the sin still deals with grave matter and is never a good thing, it may not always rise to the level of mortal sin. Throughout the Bible, we see people with multiple wives, even concubines. How does this square with marriage being between one man and one woman? It doesn't. But it's a great question to understanding the nature of God and the nature of his unfolding revelation. Let's make two important points here. First, God never commands polygamy. He simply allows it. These passages may rightly be called descriptive of the times rather than prescriptive of what God desires. Second, and maybe more importantly, God's patience with this reveals his mercy, not only with our weakness, but for women. In their culture, you have to remember, an unmarried or widowed woman was vulnerable, and so it was the just thing to welcome women into your home and provide them children. From the beginning, God created man and woman for each other, and so at no point in the Bible does he bless or encourage these types of unions. He allows them, but they're not ideal. I've been with the same woman for 7 years, and I want to receive communion. We are not married. I am not supposed to receive until I am, right? Can I safely assume by your description that you are sexually active with this woman? If so, you are correct that this present situation would not be conducive with receiving communion. But you have options. You could, first of all, choose to live chastely with one another. Simply living together is not a sin, and so if you live in a wholesome way after going to confession, there would be nothing preventing you from receiving communion. But, of course, there's always the option of getting married, right? It's been 7 years. Maybe it's time to make it official? Is contraception morally permissible if it prevents abortion? While it is certainly a noble desire to prevent an abortion, the logic doesn't necessarily follow here. Besides the fact that there is no reason one has to get an abortion if pregnancy isn't wanted, Catholic theology does not allow doing something bad to achieve a good. For Catholics, the ends do not justify the means. You have to will good things by doing good things. And finally, are sexual thoughts or temptations considered sins? Yes, but not always. Jesus teaches clearly in the Gospel of Matthew that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. This means that we must guard even our thoughts. That said, it's important to remember that we are not always in complete control of our thoughts, and we are certainly not in control of every feeling or attraction we experience. Simply thinking or feeling something isn't a sin. The sin is the willful meditation on certain things and the failure to move to another thought when they come. That's a problem. Which is not what you should do with this video, as you've gotten to the end and must have clearly liked it, and so I encourage you to share it with someone else, to rewatch it, and to ask your questions below.